Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the New Fashion Conservative Podcast. My name is Justin Phillips, your host as always, and with me is Shadow Governor Voss, the one and only.
Robin Voss's strongest soldier.
And here to talk to you about a lot of state politics stuff happening this week. But first, before we get into that, I just wanted to mention that, there's a lot of great places you can go to find content. And we're so happy you're listening to us. There's also a lot of places where you can hear a couple of people talk out their ass about things like the Iran-Israeli conflict. And that's not what we're going to do. And if you want even good, nuanced conversation about that, check out people like Ben Shapiro. The Ruthless Variety program had a great guest this week. But we're here to talk about state of Wisconsin issues. And of course, that starts with Nate Silver.
Which is obviously a local Wisconsin figure.
Local Wisconsin figure that did Barack Obama's polling. No, but we're going to do this as a little bit of table setting for our first topic. But he recently posted the latest liberal-conservative happiness gap that persists across all demographics. And overall, conservatives, 68% of conservatives on a 100-point scale would rate themselves as happy. We're 53% of liberals. And you break that down by race, Republican men are happier. Break it down by gender, by gender, Republican men are happier. By race, Republicans are happier across the board. There's a big gap with Gen Z. There's a big gap with millennials. And I say that because we're going to start talking about the No Kings protest that happened last week.
Yeah, well, I think like much of the liberal protests that have been going on recently, they're all boomers. And I love our boomers. But the left has a problem. And I know we've said it before, but the 2016 protests against Donald Trump were lit. And I don't mean lit necessarily as a good thing, but they were crazy. Mm-hmm. I mean, I still remember like it was yesterday, the guy with the bike lock in the sock just beating people, conservatives with the bike lock, and he got arrested eventually. But it just seemed like there was an Antifa protest all the time, and it was a lot of young people.
Yep.
Whereas, boomers just can't really throw hands as much as their Antifa counterparts. And so it just seems like, angry man yells at sky and shakes fist, and that's it. That
seems to be what's going on with the No Kings protest. And, it's already seemed to have fallen out of the conversation. But let's look at the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel article that somehow needed 4 bylines for the story. But you just glance through this article, and you look at the ages of people who were protesting. Julia Miranda Ramirez, 56, was waving a Mexican flag in protest, representing her people in her local Mexican community.
I think that's very telling. Her people, Mexican flag. I mean, sure, you can have a heritage, and I think that's great. But at the end of the day, you are in the United States, and isn't that the whole melting pot? Mm-hmm. We're supposed to be melting towards one culture, towards the American way, not necessarily just being in our own little ethnic enclaves. But that's not surprising. But frankly, she's probably one of the younger ones. At 56.
Yeah. So the other young one, again, Janie Christopherson of West Allis, attended her first protest at the No Kings rally. She called it a no-brainer to be there, speaking through tears, which, again, I think speaks to the happiness that liberals and the gap between liberals and conservatives. If you're going to these protests and are crying because of what else is going on in your life, where is your mental health at?
Well, there is none. And, under Biden, I know, and we discussed this a little bit earlier about, I was really disappointed with how the last administration just let everybody through the border willy-nilly. And it was aggravating. Our sovereignty was being totally violated as we let in 15 million people unvetted into the country. But what am I going to do about it? I can't go to the border with, a stick telling people to go home and driving them home. I can't do anything. So the only thing I could do was really vote and just kind of be mad about it. But these people, this is your brain on MSNBC, just 24 hours, it has to be just draining to be a liberal. And I think we said this in like our second episode too, that it is draining to be a liberal when you're constantly told that, if you don't adhere to every single modern or leftist progressive word change, that you'll be excommunicated, or the climate change is going to destroy the earth any year. Therefore, you need to take extra precautions to adhere to that. I mean, it's like
You look at that, and you look at the way they adapted to COVID and hid themselves away for so long, and again had no contact. They were hugging their family members through tarps.
And to be fair, they forced us to do that too, or at least some of us, to do that too. But it really speaks to their frame of mind, and frankly, it's sad in many respects, because it is kind of a religion. It's like these are their commandments, and they have to follow these in order to follow the general leftist orthodoxy.
And I'm not totally up on the New Age slang, but I think that's the doomerism. Yeah, am I getting that right?
Yes, libs are doom scrolling basically 24/7.
And
except for their boomers, they're not really doom scrolling. Their doom scrolling is just watching MSNBC.
And then to continue on with this Journal Sentinel article, and again, I think we've talked about this before, but the fact that the No Kings protests seem to have no direction. Mm-hmm. And you look back at the original Tea Party, it was people pissed off about government spending, about regulation of healthcare. You look at Antifa, or excuse me, not Antifa. You look at the Wall Street protest,
Occupy Wall Street.
The Occupy Wall Street. Again, they were pissed off about the inordinate, extreme bonuses and golden parachutes that people at Goldman Sachs and Bear Stearns were getting as their companies were going under and screwing over the average employees. And those had purpose.
You could just tell it was grassroots driven. Now, I think a lot of those movements did get co-opted by other movements that maybe made them more corporated or more organized. Whereas this just, in my opinion, the No Kings protest were devised simply as a distraction because there were too many Mexican flags in LA being waved around burning vehicles with hooded figures in whatever Palestinian scarves. They're throwing bricks at cops and federal agents. And the optics just weren't very good. So let's say, okay, guys, how do we change the narrative? Let's do a nationwide protest that just so happens to coincide with Trump's birthday. And everyone, get the same graphics. Everyone, be on the same page. And I do credit them. It's pretty impressive that they can coordinate that so quickly. But so to be honest, it did work. And there were more American flags at these No Kings protests than there were in LA. But obviously, according to the Journal Sentinel, there was at least one foreign flag. Yeah, and there was also a retired member of the Milwaukee Fire Department, Lori Pfeiffer, who was dressed in a red robe and white bonnet inspired by Margaret Atwood's Handmaid's Tale. I absolutely despise this unnecessary comparison that America is the Handmaid's Tale. It's so exhaustive, and it's not even close to that, and it's just this hyperbolic. And I understand most of the left is hyperbolic, but it's just that comparison always drives me up a wall. I
mean, if you want to look to countries that are actually like that, look at the women wearing full face coverings and burqas in the Middle East, and
but that would be racist against them. So they just poo-poo that and they forget about it.
But this Lori said she's no longer able to have children and never wanted to anyway, but she is worried about her reproductive rights being taken away.
And how old is she?
I think this one in there, I thought she was in her mid-70s. I don't know if they named her, but you could see the picture, and she ain't young.
So reproductive rights, probably not, just speaking logically here, probably not a super big concern of hers.
Right. But then there was Dick Clary, 78, who came out with his wife to protest. Ellen Eckerman, 78, and her husband Fred, 81, have attended multiple protests against the Trump administration in recent months. Now, they're Shorewood residents, so they're off the left-wing map anyways. There's no expectation there. But, again, the Journal found everyone here. Oh, New Berlin resident Bill Lewis, 71, came to protest with his wife because he wants to support people making an impacted by Trump's policies, like people of color and people in the LGBT community. So the entire protest seemed to be covered by boomers.
Yeah, it's incredible the amount there actually are, and I think it's for the Democrat Party, which has always tried to be a champion for honestly younger people, they're kind of going through an identity crisis. That their most avid and most adamant believers are 70 plus, and even older. And I know that Trump won the Gen X vote. That's the demographic that carried him. And with the gains in the millennial and Gen Z, if you're Democrats, I would start raising some alarm bells. And of course they have.
Yeah, but there's just such a tinge of like 60s and 70s era people coming back around. The boomers that are just bitter, ugly people who just are stuck in the 1960s and 70s.
Well, and honestly, the few times that I've knocked doors, it's always the boomers that run me out of their porch. When I try to talk to them. I've gotten yelled at by a few millennials or older, but it's usually the incredulous abortion voters that just absolutely get off. Why are you even knocking doors here? Like, get out of here. But speaking of a high concentration of boomers, the Dem Convention.
Yes.
The Dem Convention was last weekend, where they had a number of topics, but of course headlined by DPW electing a new chair.
Yes, Devin Remiker was elected in a relatively close vote for being, coronated by Ben Wickler.
Yeah, well, so I was looking at Dan Schaefer, love you, Dan Schaefer. His Twitter, he had put up there that the first ballot, ranked choice voting, might I add, broke down. First ballot was Remiker 437, Zapecki 330, and Garcia 139. So Remiker clear front runner, but the second ballot actually broke down to 485 for Remiker and Zapecki 415. So a significant portion of the Garcia vote went to Zapecki. So it was actually a lot closer than I thought. And I guess Remiker, he's now the chair, and he's handpicked by Wickler. I know I said this, I believe, in episode 2 regarding this discussion. You never want to be the guy that follows the guy. You never want to be the Kalen DeBoer that follows Nick Saban, because I don't think Remiker is going to be better than Ben Wickler. So
no,
he's got a low ceiling, but a high floor, I would say.
Yeah, and he didn't necessarily get off on the right foot by hosting a reception where they served prime rib and escargot.
Very cheap.
Yeah, and
very working class food.
Yeah, and that was the question: is how can he connect with working class voters? And frankly, I think he thinks working class voters are people who can't understand the difference between Kierkegaard and Sartre. I think he looks like the type of person who calls mixology an art form, but is going to lecture you about the colonizing roots of gin. Like, look, with the mustache, the hair, like, just screams intellectual liberal that has never gotten his hands dirty.
He also looks significantly shorter than Ben Wickler, which, I guess it doesn't really matter. But Ben Wickler is also, I think, like 6'4". Like, he's a really tall drink of water. But, I guess we'll see what he, clearly he did something good. Because he was executive director at DPW. So I'm sure he learned a lot from Ben. I'm sure he's got a lot of connections from Ben. And I'd be actually curious to see if, Wickler hasn't really said what he's going to do as well. No. So it's kind of been nebulous as to what his next steps are. So does he kind of stay on in the background helping Devin, maybe a consultant? He could probably make more just being a consultant for the party.
Yeah, we talked about that before, that he should be making a lot of money right now doing his thing. But the one thing he did deny is his purchase of, he denied the purchase of the Wickler for Governor website.
Yeah, it was very interesting. There was there's this account on Twitter for those that don't know, but it basically tracks all of the website registrations of the political nature. So then they drop this all the time, and they'll have Congress, Senate, Assembly, and governor. And it was interesting, of course, the governor category was Berrien for governor, number 4, Berrien for WisconsinGovernor.com, and then Wickler for Governor.com, which immediately sent everybody into a tizzy. So much so that the media immediately picked up on it. And based off of the timestamps, I'm looking at 11:03 from Molly Beck. 20 minutes later, Ben said, "Whoever reserved that wasn't me or anyone in touch with me. I'm Team Tony all the way."
He's Team Tony all the way because Tony is the governor, obviously.
Yeah,
but
it'd be stupid to
the minute
come out against him.
He decides to not run for re-election, he's not on Team Tony anymore. So it's very obvious.
You're Team Tony till you're not. So
yeah.
I don't really know what to make of that, but I do think it's interesting nonetheless that he came out and denied it so quickly. I don't know. I mean, I guess there's a methodology for coming out against it right away or just letting it brew. But regardless, we'll see what Ben Wickler's status in the party remains if he just stays on in the background, helping Devin kind of transition, no pun intended.
Well, I was reading a couple of blogs from the opposition side. From one of them is from a guy named Chris Liebenthal, who writes under Cognitive Dissonance. And for those of us that have been around for a while, might remember him from being like the number one anti-Walker guy in 2009, 2010. You know, his big claim to fame was being a very sweaty man behind Barack Obama at the 2010 Labor Fest rally in downtown Milwaukee. But, you know, he is, total doomer on this, thinking that Devin Remiker purchased the DPW chair.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting take. So go ahead.
And he expressed how unimpressed he was with Ben Wickler.
Which I don't even know how someone, imagine being a liberal and being disappointed in the most successful Wisconsin chair in probably recent memory.
Well, Ben, according to Liebenthal here, never defeated Ron Johnson. Well, I mean, you look at the candidate in that situation, he's upset that Trump won the state and that Derek Van Orden is still a member of Congress. So he's again, there's still some people that are, I believe, still have a voice in the party that are really disappointed in Devin's, purchasing of the DPW chair, according to this. And then looking to another boomer who you might accidentally read in WisPolitics opinion section if you accidentally click on his article, had probably the most flowery, sycophantic take that Governor Evers should seek a third term because, and again, you read this and you have to think he's full-on Baghdad Bob, just totally selling or just buying all the bullshit and every left-wing talking point on this. He should be on. So the guy who wrote it, I don't even know if I named him, is Greg Humphrey, writes at Caffeinated Politics. Should probably be on MSNBC, or maybe this is tryout for being a Wisconsin-based pundit on MSNBC. He just, the entire article says that Tony Evers, having led the state through economic challenges, education reform, healthcare improvements, should seek a third term, as Evers remains a steady hand in these uncertain times.
Well, it's funny how there's such the divide is getting more and more clear between the Dems as more people start to come out and give their take on, Tony should run. And it's probably pretty 50-50, honestly, which if you're Tony, I would be pretty worried. If you're Tony, what have you done? I mean, you've stopped a lot of Republicans from doing a lot of stuff. You've managed to win, in the midterm year when she wasn't supposed to. You give them a little bit of credit, but no, their Knives Out is totally here. And it kind of goes back to, if you're a liberal, yes, basically they won't be satisfied until they've won every single seat on the Supreme Court. They have the governor's mansion, secretary of state, treasurer, both Senate seats, the Assembly and the Senate. Like everything else, basically it's a lost cause. Like I was just looking through the cognitive dissonance article, and the fact that he can be mad that Wickler, he said, alienated many union people. He did his best work when he gave out a ton of money and that he raised and then got the hell out of the way. I'm like, wow. It's pretty bold for you basically to diss on the chair for being successful at raising $200 million in Wisconsin, which is an astronomical amount of money for the party, to then be that successful and you're still not satisfied. So, you know what I say? Pontius Pilate, I'm washing my hands of this. Let them fight. Let them fight this out. This is not our fight. I'm totally okay with them going after each other's throats.
I think Dan Schaefer in his takeaways from convention mentioned how a lot of people would say to him, but not on record, of course, said to him that Tony should not be seeking a third term. And these weren't people who were just there to be a convention delegate. Like those were people that
probably
were
some movers and shakers.
Yep. And so we'll have to see how that shakes out for them. But before we get off of the convention topic, we have to mention we were critical of RPW for resolutions and putting things out that are going to get asked by the left-wing press of every Republican running for office. Now, of course, this isn't the same that's going to happen on the Dem side because all of the people in the press are left-leaning. So there were a handful of resolutions that should be mentioned.
Well, it was interesting when we were talking about the Republican convention. I said, why the Republicans make these unenforced errors. I doubt the Democrats are going to come out with a resolution basically defending illegal immigrants. Well, I was wrong.
Yeah,
they actually did. And Dan O'Donnell had reported, and this was before convention, to be fair, about talking about they had two resolutions, and now they had more than two resolutions, but these two especially were one supporting all illegal aliens being allowed to work in the agriculture industry, and another supporting making every city in Wisconsin a sanctuary city. So I was a little surprised that they put that out there and that the Democrats, and to be fair, I didn't watch their convention, so I don't know if there was anybody that stood up and said, guys, they're going to use this against us potentially. Well, probably not, though.
Not just those issues. Now, of course, again, if anyone in the Wisconsin press corps had any integrity and any moderation, they'd ask every Democrat, do you supporting every illegal alien? But there's other convention ones there too that included a one backed by Congressman Pocan called the Block the Bombs Act, limiting the weapon transfers to Israel.
Oh yeah.
Then you had another one that in its original form called for impeaching President Trump because they haven't figured out that impeaching him just makes him stronger. They then tried to pass a resolution. They watered it down, but abolishing the Wisconsin parental school choice program.
Oh, I didn't even
that should be incredibly scandalous. But it goes unreported.
Well, it'd be funny, especially because Evers signed the largest expansion of school choice since its inception. The largest monetary increase of the school choice program since it was started. So you could say Tony Evers is the second best school choice governor in many respects. Not really, being facetious, of course, but those things I would love if the Journal Sentinel did an article about that saying, hey, this is what the Dems voted on. And then, yes, if we had some press, maybe if it wasn't, to be fair, it's been a busy news couple of weeks. So the Capitol reporters are busy, trying to talk about state budget. But I would love if we could just get one microphone in the face of one Democrat to talk about do you guys support this? Do you support ending the school choice? And of course, they'll probably go to Kelder Roys, who will give them an answer they want, which is, oh yeah, of course we should we should answer it, or of course we should end it. Instead of asking, like, I don't know, Steve Doyle out in a 50-50 district in western Wisconsin, what he thinks.
Yeah.
But that would require a bit of
effort
on the account of the journalists.
Well, if they're not spending their time comparing candidates, potential candidates for governor on the Democrat side to contestants on Destination X or Love Island. They're not doing any real work.
No. But real quickly, I wanted to, just because we were out talking about the topic of immigration, just wanted a little 1 minute plug. Well, not really plug, just talking about the story. We finally got the conclusion of the story we've been following regarding the Milwaukee Public School teacher's aide who was also an illegal alien that was in Wisconsin. And ICE gave her the final order to self-deport. So herself, and she took her two U.S. citizen children with her back to El Salvador. There was a nice little press conference at the airport where they tried to milk as many, sympathy points as they possibly could. But I wanted to highlight real quick that even 8 years ago, this story would have been manipulated against us completely. There would have probably been a full capitulation. She would still be here, and probably, and it would have been totally a win for liberals. Whereas in this case, unfortunately, she broke the law 14 years ago when she was smuggled into the United States. She had 2 anchor babies. I'm sorry, but she decided to bring them with her. That was on her own volition. She chose to do that. And again, for the 50th time, because the article that I was reading, again, failed to mention that she was applying for the T visa for human trafficked victims, and she was only human trafficked, or at least the article is making the assumption that she was human trafficked in El Salvador, when in fact they don't actually know. I did AI on this, and I said put together all the articles and determine was she trafficked in the United States or was she trafficked in El Salvador? And all the articles make the assumption that she was trafficked in El Salvador. Only one article by the Wisconsin Examiner, of all places,
not a trusted source,
which is not a trusted source, but they gave at least the nuanced take that, well, she might not have been trafficked in El Salvador, but she was actually just trafficked on her way to the United States. So she's basically applying for a visa because she was trafficked to the United States, which she, of course, chose to do. So again, this is a good thing that she was deported. I'm sorry she had her kids here, but that's on her.
Well, it's a loss for the left, but it's a win for her family that her kids now get to go meet grandma.
Yeah, and I think they were talking about that too, actually, in the story. But so I just wanted to quickly mention that so we can continue on to
some budget talks.
Of course, the impending budget talks where the state will cease to exist after July 1st and everything will shut down. No. Life will go on. Things will continue. There's not going to be the postal carriers are still going to get paid like they, not, when the federal government shuts down, who's going to get our mail? That doesn't happen in Wisconsin.
Yeah. And, for the criticisms I have of the budget process, one of the good things in it is the budget always continues. And even if it doesn't pass until August, September, October, what have you, government doesn't shut down. Mm-hmm. It just runs off of last year's or last fiscal year's budget. So things move forward.
I wish we did that at the federal level. Mm-hmm. It'd make things so much better instead of the Democrats basically demonizing anybody for, the postal carriers, what will we do? But it was interesting. There was a tweet out there from Senator Chris Kapenga regarding the budget.
Yeah.
And he gave some takes on potentially what routes they could go down.
Some takes that I think were kind of similar to the ones we talked about. Now, he gave 3. Now, we only laid out 2. And his third take was accept the governor's budget. Now, we wrote that off completely. But that was an option. It shouldn't be. It won't be. The next one is support the budget being drafted by members of Joint Finance. Version also appears to be adding unnecessary spending without any reforms that would improve the budget process or dig into wasteful spending currently in place. It's a good point. Additionally, a major risk in doing this is that the state Supreme Court has allowed Governor Evers to essentially do whatever he wants with his veto pen.
No bueno.
No bueno. No, and he's right there. There was a 400-year tax increase.
Yeah, I mean, I believe Senator Felskowski put out a nice little video because they were on the floor. What was it, like last week, this week? I can't remember. Where they were talking about how, do we actually trust the governor? Like, they negotiated with the governor last session and they got the school choice stuff in, and we were just talking about. But this was kind of the offset where he said, yeah, I'll sign the largest increase in school choice since it was created. What he didn't tell them was, I'm also going to extend the funding for public schools, basically forever, And so is that really negotiating good faith? Yeah, I don't know. And of course he had the unions to consider when he did that. And he knew that the unions would obviously hate the idea of expanding school choice. So you got to give him a bone. So is he going to do something similar? Can we agree to a budget and then he, sticks it to us a different way?
The budget writers and staff on joint finance and the speaker's office and majority leader are going to have to go through that budget line by line and make sure no words can be crossed out. No dashes can be crossed out to combine new numbers. You're going to have to write out the numbers as words.
Yeah.
Or something like you have to say at least instead of no more than or no less than. Like you're gonna have to. They're gonna have to do some tricks.
Well, I think that the bill drafters and the Evers administration have both gotten really good at their job, basically. Mm-hmm. Where the bill drafters have gotten really good at crafting a budget that you can't line on veto, and then, well, on the other side, the Evers administration has just gotten really good at finding what's those little creative ways.
They're going to have to put spelling errors in there or something and run on sentences and
remove punctuation. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know what the solution is. I know that's kind of above my frame of expertise. But there was a lot of takes on the budget, but obviously, and that was Chris Kapinga's.
He did have a third one.
Oh yes,
he did have a third one.
How could I forget?
Third one was allow the existing budget to carry over. It'd be the lowest spending increase in a decade and have no risk of a veto pen. He says unless something improves, he's going with option 3. And I don't blame him. We talked about this. We said there's 2 options. One is now you throw every conservative thing in there. I still think they should do that. But the other option, which is totally fine, is not do a budget. And essentially what Senator Kapinga is saying in this is don't do a budget. Let it carry over.
Yeah, and I think just on a gut reaction, that's the most attractive for conservatives, especially because I don't trust Evers. That being said, I think there is something to be said about, okay, the budget carries over into the next session. What happens next? What happens next session? Okay? There's going to be, so let's just say that no budget is passed at all, and there's just, it carries over for another 2 years. Who's going to get blamed for that? Who's going to take the heat? And I understand state politics, like getting blamed for stuff. There are state politicians that, of course, have lost their seats because, recalls happened, a decade ago. They lost their, votes over, or they lost their seats over certain votes.
Well, don't forget there's a state senator from Racine whose name is escaping me, and that's going to bug me for a while. But state senator from Racine who was recalled over the vote to include Racine County in the county stadium or the Miller Park tax. So,
yeah, so there's those things have happened, but do you think that this rises to the level of people are going to lose their seat because they didn't vote for a budget?
No, because it happens in the off cycle, and I think a lot of people are going to forget by this time next year when we're talking about the elections. No one's going to be like, remember when the Republicans didn't pass a budget? Like I said, I remember hearing it from 1 or 2 people a few years ago when I was working in the legislature, walking in I think it was the Franklin Parade or the Greenfield Parade. Heard a couple people razz my boss at that time about the fact that they didn't have a budget done on July 4th. And I think it got done sometime in later in the year. But that was about it. And those people really are in the know and probably really didn't like the Republican legislature.
They probably already didn't like the legislature to begin with, and they didn't need anything else to be mad at the Republicans in the legislature. Yeah. So that would probably be my concern, of course, which I think if you're game theorying stuff out, you look to 2026, another thing. There is a surplus that the state is sitting on right now. I think that there's been some conflicting reporting on how much it actually is and how much of it is reoccurring, how much of it is one time. I don't know. That being said, the state Senate is looking a little scary as far as the number of seats that are needed to flip it and the number of seats that are actually up. And that'll probably be another episode, maybe when it slows down a little bit as far as the news cycle, where we can actually talk about what those Senate seats look like. That being said, if there were come to an opportunity, let me rephrase that. In 2026, if we do not win the governor's election and we lose the state Senate, there is going to be a pot of money that will be there for the Dems to negotiate on what they want. Do we want to give them an opportunity to actually spend that? Or what if we use this budget to spend it down as much as we can in case we do lose? Then there's not as much money for them to play with. And then, of course, the Dems would have to raise taxes, which, of course, would be like absolute no-go, especially in divided government.
Well, let's not forget, earlier this week, the Joint Finance did meet, and they did put 42 assistant district attorneys in the budget. One of the things I had expressed earlier was the fact that I had my doubts that Republicans would stay together on this. And they stayed together, and they added assistant district attorneys. I saw that from a press release from Senator Wimberger's office. So got to give him credit there. And I don't know, do people want to give up those ADAs, or are legislators are going to want to pass a budget? But you talk about the Senate. We talked about Chris Kappinga. Chris has always been someone who I think starts off the budget process assuming he's going to vote no and hopes that things can be moved in the right direction to get him to a yes. There's a few of those. Another one of them is Senator Nass, and Senator Nass, I don't believe, has ever met a budget he liked.
That sounds about correct.
But he did make some really good points about what's going on in this budget and what he wants to see reformed.
Yeah, he had put out a statement, and there was a few statements that I believe would be helpful to go over because it seems like this all happened. I mean, we're recording this on Friday the 20th, and a lot of this came out just yesterday and on Wednesday. And Senator Nass had said that essentially the outline to the deal has been the same for weeks: too much spending, special interest pork, and the creation of a structural deficit. Now, of course, this is a statement. I can't speak to the details, but I mean, they're in the room. They probably know more than myself. But he was saying, unfortunately, some legislators in the Capitol would rather cut a bad deal for the taxpayers with a governor that calls women inseminated persons and uses his extremist majority on the state Supreme Court to gut the constitutional powers of the legislature. There's nothing preventing the Republican majority in the legislature from passing a conservative state budget except for the lack of willingness at the highest levels of the assembly. So, Senator Nass taking no uncertain shots at the assembly for some of their for some of their negotiations.
And what's funny about that is I know Senator Nass and Speaker Voss have known each other for a long time, and I remember having these fights years ago, and I think Speaker Voss even mentioned that Nass was a groomsman at a wedding of his, if not best man at one of his weddings. So like these guys are people who have been close, and I don't know if they're still close or if this is really just politics for press releases, or if they're still actually close. But there's a couple of senators, again, like Senator Kappinga, like Senator Nass, that have always been on this side. And I know Speaker Voss did at one point in a cycle or two ago call them budget terrorists. So
we might be going down that road again. We'll see. But yesterday as well, the Speaker and Representative Bourne put out their own statement. So we're getting a few different messages that all came out at the same time, basically saying that Assembly and Senate Republicans met in good faith with the governor and had some productive talks regarding taxes, K-12, and to help offset property taxes. They said Assembly Republicans will not pass a budget that doesn't have a guarantee from Governor Evers on tax relief, which I think that's a fair point. Then he also mentioned that this is the most conservative and the most responsible option. This budget is on a trajectory to have a more conservative growth rate than the budget that was passed by the Assembly and Senate 2 years ago. We hope Senate Republicans will come back to the table to finish fighting for these reforms and complete the budget on time. So, in a slightly nicer way than Senator Nass, he's basically saying, okay, the Senate's kind of walked away from this. Come back. Let's get a tax cut. You know, we're going to have to spend probably a little bit of money to get, you know, Tony on board, but let's, you know, I believe the tax cut was $1.3 billion was what had gone out. So there's a little bit of back and forth here. You know, a little bit of finger pointing. The Spider-Man meme is happening right now.
Yeah, and you know, I'm someone who thinks that tax cuts right now with Governor Evers in charge is a bit of a chess match as well.
Oh yeah.
You know, do you want to give the governor a chance to take away a talking point from the Republicans come November of 26, or do you want to deliver on the promises you make to your constituents regardless of who's in office? Yeah. So you got to weigh those two options. I know it's got to be tough for some legislators to think through those things, but I'm not sure if a tax cut is going to be enough to get some of those Senate Republicans across the finish line, because UW has become a problem again.
Oh yeah, it's become a big issue, and in fact, there was a statement by Speaker Voss on UW, because there was this report that had come out from the liberals, not just liberal media, not like Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, but from civic media, regarding this $87 million cut to UW that had somehow circulated. And the speaker basically said, yeah, the Republicans are upset with how the UW has acted, basically called them too woke.
Of course.
For being a higher institution of learning, and said if the UW wants money, they're going to have to make some structural changes. My problem is, and I'm all for, you know, I'm leaning towards obviously having a budget, just because I think spending the money now is going to be better than if we don't have, you know, the Senate and the governorship and just, you know, letting them spend the money, or at least negotiate for it. So I'm leaning towards that. But the UW, they don't seem, they're willing to basically talk with us when it's convenient and when they need something, but I really don't think they care what we do.
No,
they're defiant.
UW is a black hole when it comes to the state budget. It's just a giant chunk of money that they get. You know, I think there's some irony in the fact that they've hired Republican, or quote unquote Republican legislative directors, lobbyists, from offices that found the $1 billion slush fund they hid away from the legislature. Was that about a decade ago? Mm-hmm. So people should still be upset about that. People should still be upset about the fact that you don't know how much money is going to what at UW. You don't know, again, that they had a $1 billion surplus, that right now they might be sending as much as $42 million basically directly to the Chinese Communist Party.
Oh, through the H-1Bs.
Yeah, yeah. And now you have the UW-Milwaukee chancellor being puzzled on GOP lawmakers' stance on higher education. And that was out of Urban Milwaukee. Talked to Mark Moan, who, again, UW-Milwaukee chancellor since 2014, seems to be really confused on why we're not just cutting a blank check to the UW system. And you look at what happened at UW-Milwaukee over the past couple of years, it shouldn't be a surprise. No one should be puzzled by the fact that this guy let his university be overrun by pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas students when their university, their library is named after the first female Israeli prime minister in Golda Meir. Like, how do you not connect those two and be like, maybe this is on us?
Yeah, it's the lack of self-awareness is at an all-time high at the highest levels of the UW system. The fact that he is puzzled. I have no idea why Republicans are worried about spending money because, and we obviously talked about the protests and everything, but we have the K-12 cartel that wants to shovel money into that, which then pushes people onto the UW system.
Who are not prepared for
Correct.
higher education learning.
Correct, but it's just shoveling people into the system for the sake of the money. And I'm sure there's obviously people well-intended that want people to be successful, of course. But, you know, the tech schools is a good example of something that doesn't get talked about a lot, and they do a lot of good work, but it's the UW is basically in competition with them, and they actively try to snuff out the tech schools, at least for the sake of competition. And the tech schools are actually one of the most highly funded. The Wisconsin tech schools are one of the most highly funded tech school systems in the country because we believe in them, and I believe in them, and as an alternative to the current UW system. So it's puzzling to me how someone can be so self-aware or not self-aware of the situation in front of them. And frankly, that's why he's also stepping down, because he handled the whole Palestinian protest thing just absolutely horrible, which is what eventually led to him stepping down. But the UW system as a whole has basically been unaccountable. I believe one of the things that makes the UW system so unique is that the legislature doesn't have appointment authority over positions. You know, we basically give them money, and then, you know, goes to the regions, and then the regions kind of divvy it up. And that's it. That's really our only oversight. I mean, we can bring, obviously, people in to testify, and they do. I know Jay Rothman, the head of the UW system, has been in front of the legislature many times about stuff. But, I mean, what? You basically suffer through an hour of questions, and then you're back to basically doing whatever you want. I would love if we could get some real reforms, and I know the speaker had mentioned in that press conference that, you know, they want real reforms. If UW is going to get money, they need to make real reforms, and I would love to know what those actually are.
And let's play that clip from the speaker.
It's not about cutting money. What it is about getting some kind of reforms to the broken process that we currently have. Look, this is not a new topic for Republicans. I think we look and say that there is still too much political correctness on campus. We don't have enough respect for political diversity. Heaven forbid if you're a student who's Jewish or, you know, has a different viewpoint on campus where you feel like you're either targeted or the victim of potential hate. So we want to ensure that whatever happens on campus, it is a free exchange of ideas, and that people understand that's the basis for what the university should be.
Yeah, I don't think the UW system can get away with hiring a couple former GOP staffers as lobbyists and think that's enough anymore. You know, I think they need to go through their professor list. How many of them are teaching classes regularly? How many of them are actually publishing studies?
Yeah,
you know, it
needs an entire overhaul, and unfortunately, I think we can get some good reforms out of the UW, but it's going to take a Republican governor and some courage on the behalf of the legislature to pass some real reforms, because I just don't see it changing. I mean, I really don't think that I think they're scared of cuts. Yes, but they've got so much money. I mean, the UW system has got to be the largest employer in state government, I'm sure, just amount of all the employees.
And I'm sure they're in the top of the highest paid as well.
Oh, I have to imagine.
Even if you discount the coaches in their athletic department.
Well, did you see how much Chancellor Mukin makes? They were talking about her gain $150K bonus.
Jeez.
So I think it's like $800K or closer to $900. Forgive me for not knowing, but I thought I just saw an article out there about her making, you know, $800 or $900K. So frankly, the only thing that these people really listen to is money. And as much as I want a budget passed, I do have to agree just a little bit with Senator Nass about cutting the UW. He had talked to the media and said, I'm not going to sign a budget unless it cuts UW by $100 million. And frankly, a shot across the bow would probably do them good.
And if UW had sense, they would look at that and be like, maybe we can make that work, as opposed to confronting the very scary reality coming over the next 2 decades that our population is not growing at a fast enough rate. You're already seeing small private colleges like Cardinal Stritch shutting down. How much longer is it going to be before regional UW institutions have to face that same consequence because they just kept coming to the state as a giant cash pinata, and they just need to whack it every 2 years and get the $1 billion that they need?
Oh, yeah. And then, of course, they have their little media campaigns they do. And I'm like, oh, support UW, support UW. And I would love to know, and I don't know this, but I would love to do a study about how many public universities there are in Iowa, Michigan, Minnesota. How many? I mean, we have so many 4-year and 2-year, and of course that doesn't include the tech schools. Do we need them all? And we are and like you had mentioned about our demographics, it's just a fact. We're just there's not as many kids, which means there's going to be less people in the schools. The K-12, this is what I think is going to happen. This is like a 20-year thing. The UW system is going to come up against it first. K-12 will be last. But the UW will hit a point where they're going to have a reckoning, where they're going to need to start closing a lot of schools, and especially depending on the political climate and who has the ability to close down schools, or do we just keep on this system going until it's unbearable and like we have to do it? We have to close some schools, because I don't see the UW system acknowledging that at all until it's too late and we're in this crisis. I would love if we dealt with this before it became a crisis. And of course, I think the 10 or the 15-year outlook, or I should say probably closer to 20 or after, it's going to be the K-12 crisis, where we're going to have to close potentially some or consolidate school districts or something, because obviously more people are in K-12 than there are in college. And obviously some kids will go out of state and such. So the K-12 issue won't rear its head as bad until later, I think. But when it comes, I mean, obviously the left is going to push for, funding buildings over funding classrooms and teachers and individual students. And that reckoning will come. Hopefully we can fix it before it gets to that point. But
you're already seeing a couple of school districts, especially right here in southeastern Wisconsin, making those hard decisions now. The KM district, I think, just chose to eliminate one of their elementary schools. Yeah,
it was unfortunate that you saw the story on that, where they released the email, which it had the school in there that they were going to close, but then they said it was a mistake and it actually was the school they were going to close. But yes, no, it's
But you're getting to that point, and that is on the horizon. And unless UW tries to make some changes now, they're going to face a bigger problem later. So moving on, one topic that we haven't touched on yet was the political violence that happened in Minnesota, where a fella gunned down several legislators and had a list of several more. And I don't necessarily want to get into that specific story, but just the larger sense of safety in the Capitol. Now, as someone who used to work in the state Capitol, I was always a little surprised at how many entrance points were open and how there weren't some sort of security, like a metal detector, at them.
Well, how many entrances are there?
8, I believe. No, 12.
12. Well, that's a lot.
Well, you've got the 4 corners, north, south, east, and west. Then you've got the 4 street side entrances. There's these little loops that go under sets of stairs. And then you can now go, and it's been fairly recent that they opened the stairs to the first floor. Now, of course, for those that don't know the building, the first floor is the ground floor. The floor up from that is the first floor. So you go from the ground floor to the first floor on these 4 sets of stairs that go around. And so it's a very easy to access building. And there's, obviously there's never been any true violence in there. And I think Capitol Police, when it comes to responding to issues in the building, have a good response rate. There was an audit that came out recently that kind of dinged them for it. But for those that, again, don't know, have never worked in the Capitol, under desks, there are panic buttons. 99 times out of 100, if Capitol Police are coming to your office because of one of those, it's because you accidentally kicked it or it just kind of fell open. But the reality is there's still a lot of people that go into that building, and I've seen them. I was in the building earlier this year to do some lobbying for an issue close to me in the nonprofit sector. And I was walking out, and there was one person that was very clearly in the middle of being on heroin. I don't know how to say it. Like slumped over, but still standing, but not moving. Like
they looked like they were on something clearly.
Yeah. And then the people next to him were clearly homeless or near homeless. They smelled it. Mm-hmm. They had all of their belongings in very old bags. And for the building to allow people to just kind of walk in without any schedule or anything, that's where I have some concerns. I know there's folks on...
There's been a couple different takes on this because, again, Chris Kapenga is at the center of it. He was on up front, and I don't have the clip in front of me, but essentially he said, we need metal detectors. There should be a gun ban, except for legislators. So the legislators can carry, but basically anyone else, you can't bring in weapons, and then metal detectors at all the entrances, which, I mean, I don't really have a dog in the fight. I know the speaker actually came out, I think in the same press conference that he had spoken with on the UW system, he had said that he doesn't want to turn it into a fortress, essentially, because there is kind of a fine line where it is, I do think it would be nice to continue to have open access for the public where they don't feel like they have to go through TSA to get into a public building. Mm-hmm. At the same time, frankly, these threats are very real. And I do remember there was that story, boy, it was last year. I think it was last year. Maybe it was 2 years ago, regarding the guy that came into the Capitol with an AK.
Yes.
And he said,
just wanted to talk.
Yeah. And he said, I need to see Tony Evers. I'm like, yeah, you probably shouldn't. So they booked him in jail. Well, knowing Dane County policing, he was out within the hour, came back to the Capitol that night with the AK. And it's like, okay, guys, this dude is clearly on, and I believe his name was Taco, which makes it even better. And then after the second time, I think the article said that they quoted him saying, yeah, I'm moving to Colorado. So this guy clearly on something or just not of right mind, walked into the building, clearly Capitol Police, handle it fine. And then he said, okay, I've caused enough trouble. I'm literally going to move states now.
Yeah. And I know there's, and I can't remember the reason, but there were some protests outside the Capitol when I was there most recently. And one of them was a trans person with an AK. And I'm not sure, like genuinely an assault military style AK-47. I'm not sure if it was real. I'm not sure if it was an airsoft one modeled or something like that.
I think it was real. I think I remember, I thought MacGyver Institute posted a picture, or maybe it was MacGyver, posted a picture of her.
Him.
Question
they,
mark.
them.
But yeah, I think they were on the steps of the Capitol, which, sure, I guess. So, I mean, and obviously they didn't, go, I don't think they went into the Capitol or anything, but so it is a concern. And I don't really know. I don't know what the best way to handle it is. I really don't.
I think full metal detectors becomes a problem for a couple reasons. One is like, we do have a concealed carry law in the state that allows for people to concealed carry in the Capitol. And I know the folks that were on that side were quick to point that out. And, one of the things I loved when I was working in the Capitol was the days when we didn't have the protest singers that were, again, talk about boomers that had nothing better to do and bitterness, that they'd go sing made-up songs. There were days when you'd have high school choirs, middle school bands, high school bands come and play. And it was always nice. And the building, the music you can hear very well in there. That's great. So making it so those folks can still come and we can still have those nice moments in the state capitol would be great, as opposed to, letting homeless people come in from the rain for a couple hours and spend their time there. Like, I bristle at giving them free access.
Yeah. And again, I'll just restate that there are two very different camps, and probably what's going to happen is I don't think anything's going to happen. I feel like this always this conversation comes up when something tragic happens, and then nothing really happens. And I don't necessarily know what maybe state police has it handled. Maybe that's the safety precautions are in place or are good enough for our situation. But it is worrisome that someone, a crazy person could come in and theoretically go into an office and raise hell, essentially. So, unfortunately, it's the world we live in, and we just hope that people are of more sane mind and that would never happen in Wisconsin.
Yeah, I mean, credit to the people in 2011, I guess, that they stormed the Capitol. There's 250,000 people there, I think, allegedly, at least 100,000 at various points. Not January 6th, but
the Act 10 protests.
The Act 10 protests, and none of them were violent. In fact, I think one of them was a little bit rough because they tried to corner Glenn Grothman, and I want to say Brett Halsey, a kooky Democrat from downtown Madison, stepped up to defend him. And there was a few times where the protesters would get in the face of people, but there was never any violence with that. So
I think some protesters were definitely, some of them broke some windows though, right?
I think some state senators let them in through windows.
Oh.
So maybe they broke it to make it look like it, but...
Well, and I thought I had heard that there were definitely some protesters that were using the hallway as a bathroom at times.
It smelled like it.
Oh, it certainly smelled like it, so who knows on that, but going back to our original topic, the No Kings protest made me go down that rabbit hole of protesters during the recall. And so hat tip to MacGyver for one of their old videos of a gal named Thistle who went on a very long rant in front of a MacGyver camera operator. I think it was Bill Osmulski was doing it. So we should just put that out there, say that these No Kings protests and the people behind them, people involved in them have been the same people that have been doing this in the state for years.
Yeah.
Honestly, The Act 10 protests were more fun, so the Dems should get back to that, but maybe under another Republican governor.
And like we said, at least those protests had a purpose.
Yeah, and they were kind of, fun, honestly. for at least, it made things more high stakes. It made it more interesting. Whereas, frankly, I'm sorry, 7 boomers, on a Saturday with the signs created by the organizers doesn't really invigorate much opposition. That being said, we don't really have a whole lot of candy this week, but I wanted to just mention, and it's kind of just an off thing, real quick tweet essentially, but it just came out today, which is why I was bringing it up. But our illustrious governor finally realized that this month is Dairy Month. He just put out a video this morning, regarding, Wisconsin is America's dairyland, and that's a fact. # June Dairy Month.
Still using a hashtag.
Still using hashtags, which I didn't know was a thing. Did he just realize that it's June 20th and that Dairy Month is almost over and now he has to call for it? Or he had to wait for Pride Month and then Juneteenth, and now he can call June Dairy Month?
Probably had to wait out Pride for a couple of weeks. But did he put that out today?
Yeah, just today.
So great timing, great staff work, great press work by Karine Jean-Pierre, Britt Cuddebeck, to put out this half-assed video on Friday at noon when everyone is very clearly paying attention to what's going on. And of course, I'm watching, it's from his desk in the Capitol. So it's clearly someone said, "Hey, Tony, we forgot about Dairy Month. We got to do something." Like, any decent staff work would have sent him to a farm, even in Dane County. Put him in some jeans. Don't put him in
a tan jacket
and a
just
black shirt, which makes him look like a funeral director. Yeah, just go up to a farm in somewhere in Dane County or Sauk County. It's a 45-minute drive at most. Put him in some jeans and a flannel, and have him read the exact same script.
I mean, it's so. I mean, I know they put some B-roll in there or whatever of him visiting some other stuff, but yeah, it's not very hard for them to go.
He doesn't even have a glass of milk or a cheese curd on his desk.
I mean, you could make the most tchotchke thing ever. I mean, it's not difficult, but I just thought it was interesting. And of course, they had to get through the actual real reason for June, which is for Pride. So once they got through all of that, then they can acknowledge, Wisconsin's most storied tradition, of, being the dairy state. No big deal. So I just thought it was interesting. Not anything other crazy stories or anything, but did you have a recommendation of the week?
So we're doing a recommendation of the week for our 2 weeks in a row. So I'm very nervous to have something for next week. But my recommendation of the week this week is a book called The Wolves of K Street. A really interesting read that tells the stories behind some of the most influential lobbyists in D.C. and their falls from grace from the 70s, 80s, 90s, and into today. There are stories of both Democrats and Republicans, Dem lobbyists like Tommy Boggs and Tony Podesta, whose brother ran the Hillary Clinton campaign. They both ran Wall Street or K Street firms straight into the ground by failing to make any of the right business decisions. Evan Morris was another lobbyist. He was with Gentech, who committed suicide instead of facing embezzlement. Instead of facing the charges of embezzlement, the scheme that he was running.
Must have been pretty bad if you're just willing.
Oh, it was in the millions of dollars that he was running from his employer, Gentech, to another firm doing media relations in the most vague terms and no real contract. And then the guy who was running that media firm would kick half of it back to Morris. It eventually all caught up with him. He was a lavish spender and ran up a multi-$1,000 tab of wine before putting a bullet in himself. Wow. He was young, too. He was in his 30s. And then finally, something that I was also very interested in is it does tell a bit of the story of Roger Stone, Paul Manafort, who also worked with Lee Atwater and Charlie Black in the 80s. Those were Reagan's fixers. Mm-hmm. So I was very... The biggest one I found, or one I found most interesting there, was how Paul Manafort got into Donald Trump's orbit and why the Ukraine impeachment happened. Some of it was because of Paul Manafort, because he was embezzling and running or lobbying on behalf of a fake Ukrainian think tank that was a pro-Russian side. Real interesting stuff. I didn't know necessarily how Roger Stone and Paul Manafort got into Trump's orbit, but of course...
Yeah, they just kind of were there.
Yep, and then Paul Manafort, of course, didn't squeal. He didn't name names, and so he got his pardon. But a great read to explain how lobbying kind of avoids the laws that are put in place and how they influence policy. And it's, again, very interesting because you had people like Tommy Boggs, like Tony Podesta, who were Democrats but started lobbying against parts of Barack Obama's healthcare act. So give that one a read. Check it out.
How long of a read is it? I'm not a quick reader. I like to
It'll take you a little bit.
Okay. It's pretty in depth. I'm sure it's pretty heavy on the details, but
yeah,
those are some of the best reads, and I'll have to take a look at it. One thing I have like 5 books that I need to catch up on. A number of them, maybe they'll be my recommendation of the week in a couple of weeks. I recently picked up The Rise and Fall and Rise of Communism. I know, very generic, but it goes through the whole history back from pre-World War II, Cold War, the fall, then kind of the rise of modern communism, kind of the Democrat socialism of today. And then I have another one, Defeating Radical Radical Islam. It's actually a book from an Indian American, because obviously India has a big conflict with Pakistan. So he kind of comes at it from that perspective. I thought it would be interesting to pick. I picked it up from a used bookstore. I said, why not? And then I also have a couple other books regarding kind of the gender nonsense that's happening from a very high level. Something that we kind of get the Charlie Kirk kind of, or the Matt Walsh, What is a Woman, which those are very good conversations, and I'm all happy for it. But the book, I can't remember the name of it, but it comes up from a very high level. And then there's another one called Common Good Constitutionalism, which is probably controversial even in conservative circles regarding, do we go with originalist, contextual, an originalist frame of looking at the Constitution or looking at this common good constitutionalism, which kind of probably makes some conservative lawyers a little bit squeamish. Not that I'm endorsing common good constitutionalism, but I want to hear that take, just because, the one gripe about the conservative legal area is that liberals never get a bad lawyer or a bad judge. They always get their ideologues. And I understand that's just kind of the divide between how liberals view things versus how conservatives do. But it always seems like Republicans have some issues with some judges. And I understand that'll probably never change, but I'm going to read those books and I will report back.
Excellent. Well, another great episode here.
I agree.
If I do say, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to our podcast on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, or wherever you get your podcast. Show notes can be found at our Substack, newfashionedconservatives.substack.com. And don't forget, put your email in. Don't miss a single thing that we post. Make sure to be the first people to know about our podcast. And follow us at New Fashion Pod on Facebook, Rumble, Truth Social, at New Fashion Conservatives. Send us memes, feedback, hate mail. But if you do like what you hear, make sure to give us that 5-star. It actually does help us with the ratings. So for this episode, I'm Justin Phillips.
Shadow Governor Voss, Robin Voss's strongest soldier.
Good night.